Hello, and thank you for joining the Office of Research and Innovation this afternoon. The Office of Research and Innovation's mission is to foster the advancement of cutting-edge research discoveries and technology at the University of Texas at Dallas. With our departmental resources, we provide faculty, staff, and students with a variety of specialized information and training to help efficiently navigate funding opportunities. During today's National Science Foundation Career Spotlight Series, Dr. Gabriele Meloni will share his experience with planning, drafting, and developing effective strategies to prepare a successful NSF career proposal that can be attractive for both reviewers and program officers. I am Tiffany Willoughby, Research Education Programs and Outreach Manager in the Office of Research and Innovation at the University of Texas at Dallas. I will serve as the session moderator. Joining us today is Dr. Gabriele Meloni. Dr. Meloni's research interests focus on the chemistry of metals in biological systems. He holds a PhD in Bioorganic Chemistry from the University of Zurich, Switzerland, and subsequently has been a Marie Curie postdoctoral fellow at the California Institute of Technology and Aarhus University, Denmark. His postdoctoral work investigated the chemistry and structural biology of transition metal transporters. He has established an independent research group at the University of Texas at Dallas in 2015 to implement a research program that builds on his bioinorganic expertise. His research group focuses on the development and application of biochemical and biophysical tools to characterize at the molecular level the structure, reactivity, and metal binding properties of soluble and transmembrane proteins and biomolecules involved in transition metal homeostasis. The research relies on a common bioinorganic chemistry denominator aiming at elucidating the mechanisms of transport, reactivity, and coordination chemistry of essential and toxic transition metals, as well as metal-based complexes utilized as anti-cancer drugs or metal-based compounds in diagnostics. Welcome, Dr. Meloni.
Welcome, Tiffany. Thank you for having me here today. So, again, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today. And it's actually a real pleasure to present something that it's usually not we usually present at conferences. So the aim today is really to share with you my experience in planning and drafting a career research proposal from the step of really getting the initial idea and proceeding then to develop the proposal itself and submitting it to the National Science Foundation. Obviously, I think that to put in the frame the proposal that I have been submitted, I think it would be good to start from really my professional background in education, as you can see in this outline. And then I will present a little bit about our research program in my group and how we can leverage on our previous accomplishments and expertise in trying to develop a career proposal that can be compelling. Of course, the NSF career proposal is I would say, rather unique type of application compared to other proposals that we are typically used to submit. And I think it requires quite a lot of planning and timing to really develop a successful proposal, and I will discuss this in detail. And then I will go ahead and discuss about my research proposal and the scientific part of my proposal. And after that, I will be presenting about integrating scientific components with the broader impacts, in particular with education plan and outreach. And also we'll highlight a few tips concerning letters of collaboration and the letters from the department chair in support of the application, and then discuss about proposal submission and outcomes. Just a little bit about myself. I'm originally from Italy, and I obtained my master's degrees in biotechnology in Italy at the University of Milan. After that, I moved out of the country and I obtained a PhD in bioorganic chemistry at the University of Zurich. And already at that stage, I basically gave a line on my professional preparation, if you will, and the focus of my future research. I have been working at that time during my PhD project on the characterization of a class of metal binding proteins that we have in all organisms, including humans. And I developed skills in terms of spectroscopic methodology to study metal binding proteins. After that, I actually moved to the United States for my postdoctoral work, supported by 2 fellowships, one from the Swiss government, from the Swiss National Science Foundation, and followed by a fellowship provided by the European Union called Marie Curie Fellowship, that basically provided me support throughout my postdoctoral work, and also gave me the possibility at that time that I think it's important to actually switch a bit about my research expertise, because during my postdoctoral work, I got actually experience in structural biology technique like X-ray crystallography and X-ray absorption spectroscopy that I actually then heavily implemented in my current research program. After that, I actually had a break from California Institute of Technology at Aarhus University in Denmark, simply because the Marie Curie Fellowship actually required to have a re-entry phase in Europe of at least 1 year to basically implement the knowledge that has been gained going abroad to the United States back in Europe. After that, though, I decided to come back to the United States, and I have been joining UTD in 2015 as assistant professor in the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry. And I have been recently promoted to associate professor just this September. I think that by giving this education, you can clearly see that already from my PhD experience, I started to develop this interest in bioorganic chemistry. That is actually my central theme of research in my research group. You might ask, what is bioorganic chemistry and what we are working on? As you probably, some of you might know, in our body and in all living organisms, we are required to have specific trace elements that allow cells to survive. And some of those trace elements, and they are called trace elements because they are typically present in very small amount in our body. Some of those trace elements are actually transition metals. And these transition metals can be something like copper, iron, zinc, manganese, nickel, cobalt, that are basically present in every form of life and in every single cell to perform very specific biological and physiological function. Essentially, living organisms exploit the chemistry of these particular transition metals as trace elements to perform fundamental reactions that allow life to exist. Turns out that evolution and nature evolve a very sophisticated network of biomolecules, in particular proteins in every cell, that are in place to guarantee that these trace metals levels are finely regulated, and the metals can actually enter and go out from the cells at the right time and go to the right place to target specific metallozyme within the cytoplasm. And we have as well a very sophisticated network of storage and metal-dependent sensor in the cell that basically regulate and coordinate this transition metal homeostasis. And my research program is actually devoted at investigating the chemistry and biochemistry of the molecular processes that are regulating this fine network of biomolecules regulating transition metal homeostasis. Obviously, since the system that we target are very diverse, my actual research group is actually divided in multiple subgroups that basically target different classes of these biomolecules that we are having in the cells. And the focus of my career proposal that I will dig on a little bit more in detail later on is actually related at investigating these class of proteins that are called membrane proteins that are acting as active transporters to allow these trace metals to go from one side to the other of the membrane, means to enter the cells and go out from the cells. And it turns out that this is an interesting biological and chemical aspect of biochemistry due to the fact that the knowledge that we are having on these transporter systems for transition metals is actually pretty limited. And this is intrinsically due to the fact that studying membrane protein per se is actually more complicated and challenging than studying other soluble protein or other biomolecules that are actually water soluble. So the fact that it's challenging to study this system, it also translates to the fact that these systems are really poorly investigated, despite they play a very fundamental role in all biological system metallohomeostasis. Just to give you an idea on the general area that we cover in our lab, I just want to present the 4 main classes of research that we are actually undertaking, simply because I think it's very important when you actually plan and think about developing an NSF proposal to really think what of your research aspect that you're covering in your research group would actually be more suitable and appealing for an application to the National Science Foundation versus other agency, because you don't want to have significant overlap between the proposed project and eventually other grants that you are already having in your research group. So one of the main areas that we study is really related to the fundamental chemical aspects of understanding how these metal transporters work. So we want to understand the bioorganic chemistry, and I say bioorganic because we are combining biochemistry with the study of transition metal that is typical the realm of inorganic chemistry. And we really want to nail down the molecular and chemical aspect on how these systems work. This obviously, it's clear that since it's addressing very fundamental aspects that try to basically reveal new principles of how these molecules work, I think that it's clear that already looking at this topic, this would be a good fit for developing a project for the NSF CAREER proposal. Another area that we cover is actually the identification and characterization of new target transporters that they have biomedical relevance. And actually this particular aspect of our research is currently supported by the NIH, the National Institute of Health, especially because it is deeply involved in having a biomedical relevance. And therefore, already just looking at this, you can start to think, yeah, okay, if I have to develop a compelling proposal for NSF, I probably should limit the biomedical relevance and really focus mainly on fundamental questions related to the mechanism on how this system works. Then we are also investigating a series of other proteins that are important for the chemistry neurons of metalloproteins, and as well working as storage proteins for storing metals in the cells. And these are more specialized projects, and actually I decided at that time that this more specialized project would be more suitable for application to more specialized agencies. And as a matter of fact, at the same time when I submitted and developed my NSF CAREER, I also supported this particular line of research by applying to a private foundation called West Foundation that supports chemical research here in Texas. So I think that when you start thinking developing an NSF CAREER proposal, it's really important that, first of all, you leverage on your past experience and demonstrated abilities in a specific field, but also you really carefully choose the topic of your proposal such a way that it will meet programmatic priorities of the actual NSF programs that you are going to apply to. Just to dig a little bit more in focus, what we are applying in our lab is mainly our structural techniques, structural biology techniques that allow really to study the structure of these biomolecules. And as well, at the same time, we develop a methodology or novel methodology to try to address the function of these transporters and these biomolecules at the molecular level. So essentially, we combine structural components with a functional method developed components that basically is integrated one with the other to really then address fundamental questions like how this system works, what is the chemistry behind it, what is the structure that is controlling these transport mechanisms by these transporter molecules. So this is actually, I think, an important aspect also to consider when developing the NSF proposal, is because you probably want to develop a compelling scientific research component showing that you basically are at the cutting edge research in that particular field, so that you are developing new methodology that has not been developed before, that can have broader impacts, because then other scientists could apply to other systems. You know, I think the NSF CAREER is aimed basically at funding early career researchers and educators that are really at the forefront of their specific field. And I think that obviously when you develop the scientific research component, it's important that you try to highlight every single aspect of your contribution to that particular field that are novel and unique. Another advantage that I think I leveraged on my proposal is that bioorganic chemistry, that is the core research in our lab, is actually an interdisciplinary field that combine more standard biochemistry and molecular biology technique with inorganic and coordination chemistry techniques. So these are typically two separate fields, but we are right in between the two of them. And we actually, and I think I highlighted in several parts of my proposal, how we actually combine expertise from the two different fields to basically develop new methodology that allow to study these systems that are rather unique. So if you are thinking about writing a proposal, I think that it would be a very good idea to actually sit down and think about what are your technology innovation components that for which you have demonstrated expertise that you can implement in your proposal and highlight and showcase to convince the reviewer that your research is unique and is very different from the one of anyone else in your discipline. So just to go to my specific career proposal, the title of my proposal was Plasticity, Promiscuity, and Transport Mechanism in Transmembrane Metal Pump. Already from the title, you basically want to try, or at least I tried, to actually highlight that our approach to study this transmembrane metal pump is actually very diverse, and we are trying to really discover new models to describe how these systems are working and how they are unique. When you are actually developing the career proposal, I think it's very, very important that depending on the content of the proposal, that you target the right program and the right division in the application process, simply because I can give you the example, and I will go a little bit more in details later on. This particular research actually could be seen at the interface between chemistry and biology. And then when you develop the proposal, you might ask yourself, would it be more suitable to actually apply to the division of chemistry or to apply to a different directorate like biological sciences? And I think it's really an important decision to make, because different directorates, they have different funding levels, they have different success rates, they have different programmatic priorities. So it's a very good idea to really spend some time to do some research on prior funded career project in different divisions to see what is the best fit for your particular proposal. To go really at the specific area that this particular proposal target, so this is basically taken out of my summary page. You want to give an idea in just one of two sentences of what is the main topic that you will be covering in your proposed research and educational plan. So here's you can read it. The proposed research aims at a family-wide characterization of transport mechanism in metal pumps acting as nanomachine to address selectivity, promiscuity, and in particular, what you want to highlight is that you don't want to have a very narrow specific goal for your project, but it should be very general. You want to discover new paradigms, new principles, new discoveries that can be applied to the broader research field. I think that this is particularly important for a career proposal because basically the grant is supporting your development in terms of a leader in a specific area that can be then extended to many different systems studied by other investigators. So if you can actually communicate this already in your first page summary, that is probably a good idea and a good point. Obviously, the career proposal integrates scientific research and scientific discovery with broader impacts and an educational plan. So it's important that you highlight, in particular in your summary page, how your research project can be well integrated with a novel educational plan that is unique and different from all the other that NSF has funded before. In my case, I think I leverage from the fact that bioorganic chemistry is actually a rather niche field that is really at the interface between different disciplines that are basically biochemistry and inorganic chemistry. And despite being very important, is actually very unexplored. And essentially, what we could highlight is that if we make, through our research, specific contribution to this underrepresented and unexplored field, we can reveal new novel aspects that are relevant to all life processes. And I specifically introduced these life processes because the actual program to which I submitted my proposal is specifically called Chemistry of Life Processes. So I think it's important that when you're writing your introduction and summary page to the proposal, you really target the priorities of the program to which you are submitting your proposal. Now, obviously, the career proposal, it's a big proposal, it's a long proposal, it has a research component and an educational broader impact component, and of course, it's taking time to prepare the proposal. The question that I ask myself, and probably many other PIs that are applying to the NSF career proposal, is when should I submit my NSF career proposal? You probably all know that you are allowed to have 3 submissions, and this actually you have to take it into account in when starting planning for your proposal and when to submit your first proposal. And the second aspect to consider is that the NSF career program is for early career scientists and educators to develop them as the next generation scientists in that particular area. So it means that the last proposal can just be submitted right before promotion to associate professor and before getting tenured. So one can make some consideration based, and these were, in my case, based on discussion with the other colleagues that obtained the career proposal before. The consideration is you might think about submitting the first career proposal as early as possible to maximize the number of potential submissions that you can have, up to the 3 allowed. You can say, if I start early and I'm not successful, I can obtain reviewer feedback that this will allow them to develop a stronger resubmission that then will be successful. And the other aspect is that obviously one thing is submitting and one thing is preparing the proposal. And my strong recommendation is to start preparing the proposal well in advance and to develop it with time. I would say that probably a good time window would be 8 to 12 months prior to the application deadline that is typically in summer, at the end of July or beginning of August. And this is particularly relevant to allow the development of relationships with collaborators that will be implemented in the research projects, and in particular with collaborations that are essential for the educational programs, because this requires really the generation of networking with people depending on the proposed educational plan that are most likely outside the institution. And obviously it will require some efforts and time to actually develop the relationship to developing a compelling educational program. That said, I can share my experience. I essentially did not really follow most of this consideration that I did. I actually applied for my first NSF career submission at the end of my 5th year as assistant professor. And the reason why I decided to do so is because I wanted to actually develop first, before submitting the career proposal, a solid body of work that would justify the application to the career. So I actually applied to other funding agencies before, such a way that I could fund my research, get a lot of preliminary data, be able to develop new methodology, and demonstrate that then that methodology that we developed could be applied to the research project that was implemented in my NSF research career. This obviously was a bit against the consideration of submit the proposal as early as possible to maximize the potential number of submission, because when I submitted the first career application, if that would have been unsuccessful, I could have only be submitted the second one, but not a third one, in case, and that luckily was the case, I would get promoted and tenured. Obviously, I was a bit scared and doubtful about that strategy, because a lot of feedback that I got from other colleagues here and as well outside the institution, they essentially told me that very likely your first NSF career application will not be successful. In several cases, you have to resubmit your application before you are receiving your NSF career grant. But in my experience, I have been lucky enough that the NSF career basically was funded at the first submission. So this tells you that it's not really important the number of application that you put in NSF, but it's probably more important that you submit the application when you feel that your proposal is very strong and you have a very solid both scientific and educational component. The other question is, what should be the core research and education topic of my proposal? So as I mentioned before, I think that it's very important that the topic has to be a very impactful one. It should be something that has potential for development in the broader community of scientists. The discovery should be really allowing other researchers to enter this field that you are proposing or this topic that you are proposing and implement their own research. I think it should be transformative as much as possible. And in particular, to show feasibility, I think that it's important that your proposed research topic and educational plan should basically be supported by a solid record of accomplishment in that particular research area. Otherwise, you risk that the reviewer say, yeah, okay, the research that is proposed is very interesting, is potentially impactful, but most likely you are not qualified to perform that particular type of research in a successful manner. Another important aspect is, and this was something that was really related to my career proposal, is that the research core components of the proposal and goals should be very distinct from the ones that are already funded by other research grants in the proposal, especially because the program officers, if they will recommend for funding your proposal, they will specifically ask details of what is the research conducted in your lab, what are the funding agencies that are funding specific components of that research, and how the research components in the NSF career proposal is different from all the other. So that is something that is very important in the planning steps of your proposal. So consideration here is it's very important that you look for the most appropriate directorate, division, and program to submit your proposal, such a way that your proposal is actually fitting the programmatic priorities of that particular division and program. And this is something that I encourage everyone to do while developing the career proposal. Feel free to contact the program officers in advance. They are typically very useful and helpful in letting you know if your proposed research and educational plan is actually within the programmatic relevance of that particular program. I have done that in my case. In my case, having decided the topic of my research, as I mentioned before, going really towards chemical principles in bioorganic chemistry for these particular transporters that we plan to investigate, I think I decided already early on that my directorate would be mathematical and physical sciences and not biological sciences, and I would apply to the division of chemistry in the chemistry of life processes program. I think obviously everyone developing a career proposal should do with due diligence research on the NSF website on the different programs and the different division to see what is the best fit for the proposed career grant. Another consideration is that funding by multiple directorates is possible, but the proposal content should actually strongly justify it. And here I think it's very important to contact program officer before to see if that is a possibility. I put here budget considerations. Considerations should be made, I think, because different divisions and different programs might have different funding levels and different success rate. So in the planning of your career proposal, it's something that you want to consider. And I just give the example of chemistry versus the division of biology or biological sciences, because the career grants in the division of biological sciences are traditionally a bit larger in terms of budget compared to the one funded through chemistry, though that is not always the case. So I think a very good resource is really to go on the search engine of the funded proposal of the NSF and look what has been funded before and at which funding levels. So it's important in a career proposal to integrate intellectual merits coming from the research component with broader impacts in the educational component. And this is just an extract of the public abstract of my proposal that basically should highlight the main point of what is the content of the proposal. So the first point is define what is the goal, the general goal of the career proposal. In our case, molecular mechanism of function of transmembrane transporter protein across cellular membrane. Important is to identify a gap on knowledge. So what is not known and what is a series of very important questions that need to be answered. And you will try to do that obviously in your career proposal. And what are the expected outcome in terms of the research component? So in this particular case, I wanted to highlight that we want to contribute to a poorly explored area, and that's where we can contribute a lot because we have experience in it. But that area is actually very important and would allow to provide new general insights regarding very common processes in living organisms. And this basically go to the relevance of the program of chemistry in life processes. Then you want as well to integrate the broader impacts of the educational plan and integrate it well with the research component. And in my case, I tried to have the educational program to be multifaceted as possible, in basically leveraging on the fact that bioorganic chemistry is basically a poorly explored discipline that is not really covered in many of traditional curriculums. And by developing this program and integrating it with the research component, we can now promote interest and engagement in the student population and even the broader community into a field that is bioorganic chemistry that is really not a very well-known field. So By doing that, basically you can leverage and say on this introduction, say the project can promote awareness and interest from society and students in a novel field that is very important for biological system, that is inorganic biochemistry. Now, what I want to do is to go through how I structure my NSF career proposal, because you might find some ideas when you are then sitting down to develop your own proposal. So my proposal was structured in an initial 1.5 page describing project overview, importance of the proposed career project, and what are the goals of that particular NSF career proposal. So I provided a brief introduction information on the project. I think it's very important because sometimes reviewers are not right in the field of the research and education that you are proposing. And I think it's very important in the first page to really define what is the gap in knowledge and why it is important to fill that gap in knowledge. And it should be not really long, like 2-3 phrases, but I think really should go to the point of what we need to know more and why that is important. Then go and define the general question to be addressed and provide a general overview on the experimental approach to be utilized to address those specific questions. And then I typically do for every grant, but I did as well for the NSF career, I just briefly introduce the overall specific aims without going too much in details. In my case, there were 2 general main aims that I will present you in a minute, just to give the feeling of what are the main goals of the proposal. Then I provided immediately afterwards a summary of the broader impacts and provide information about the educational components and how this is integrated in the research proposal. I basically define the knowledge that will be gained when the project is completed and how this relates to the field of interest. And then I basically go into details and explain how we integrate these efforts with the multifaceted educational outreach program to promote awareness and education opportunities in this particular case in the field of bioorganic chemistry. So it's just half a page. It's not really detailed, but it's just giving a snapshot of what you will be discussing in the educational plan in the second part of your proposal. This way, I think that reviewers have already a general idea of what will be the overall content of the entire proposal. And obviously, this initial part has to be catchy, because if you don't get the reviewer enthusiasm at the beginning when he's reading the first 2 pages, it will be not really motivated to actually have a positive attitude when going through the rest of the proposal. So I think the initial 2 pages is very important. Then what I have done, I provided a 1.5 page background information about current state of the field, so that the reviewers understand the importance of the topic in respect to the aims. And in this part, I think it's very important, and this might be a small point, but it happened to me in previous submission, that it's very important to cite and reference extensively prior work, and in particular work by other research group, not only your own, because you might consider that some member of the panel and some reviewers can actually be scientists that have been working in that particular field. And it will not be good to actually have review the background of your proposal, cite, present past research, but not cite the work of someone that is a leader in the field. This, I think, will be very detrimental in the evaluation of your proposal. And of course, use graphics and table to summarize key points. Graphical elements are typically very helpful for the reviewer, because they give you a visual impression of what you are proposing in the proposal. And this is just one example of a schematic that I put in my proposal, just to show how the system that we are addressing in the proposal work. Then you want to have like a 7-8 page proposed research description or plan. I have structured it by providing a half-page summary of the overall goals to be achieved, and then I defined specific aims in reference to the two main aims of the proposal that I put in the first page. And these particular two aims are presented here right from my proposal. They were divided in two aims, each of those divided in two sub-aims, in which basically the first one was more focused on the chemical principle and structural principle that control substrate selectivity and promiscuity in this class of transporters called metal pumps, while the second one was more focused on leveraging on the new methodology that we have developed to study these transporters in terms of function and transport properties that we have developed in our lab and that we will now apply to this class of proteins that we are targeting in the CAREER proposal. What I found unique in my plan that I wanted really to highlight, I want to describe in great detail the experimental approach and the expected outcome for each of the aims. So I really had a very detailed description of the methodology and the experimental approaches, something that I typically do not go too much in detail for other proposal application. Also here, utilize as many schematics as possible, as many graphs as possible. And I think a section that is very appreciated by the reviewer define what are potential pitfalls and what could be alternative strategies that can be used to overcome those potential pitfalls. And then I moved on with the completing the CAREER proposal with the educational plan. In my case was a little bit more than 4 pages. So in there, I introduce and define the general educational program, make sure that it's very well integrated with the research activities. And here I have to thank, it's very important to define a very appealing name for your educational plan. And it's very helpful to actually look for help from people that are near you, either your colleagues or your family or your friends. In this particular case, I have to thank my wife, Daniela. She's a biologist, and she actually came up with a very interesting idea and gave me this idea, as a matter of fact, to call the program as PCR, that is the name of a particular technique used in biology that is called polymerase chain reaction, that is used to amplify genes. Here, instead, we change it to peer-led chemistry reality, in which we try to amplify knowledge as the original technique amplify genetic material in a lab. This actually was very much appreciated by the reviewers in the comments that I have received. And essentially, I defined the general goals, and you can read them over here. We wanted to have a multi-targeted approach to essentially instill in students at all levels the desire for discovery and learning in the particular field that we are contributing into, that is bioorganic chemistry. So then I defined specific elements of the educational program that have been discussed then in details in the proposal. So the components that I had was to generate a new series of videos called Chemist Reality, in which basically that we are starting right now, and I will present in a minute, where we are basically trying to generate tutorial videos featuring real research conducted in my lab by a couple of undergraduate and graduate students, and featuring how they develop their research and how they obtain and analyze the results, such a way that basically you have like a reality show featuring graduate students and undergraduate students performing research to outreach to students that do not have access to research opportunities, like from PUIs or high school students. Then I also had 2 other components that were more educational. The first one was to implement peer-led undergraduate and high school research experiences in bioorganic chemistry in my lab, and then also to develop a novel mixed instructor-based peer-led bioorganic chemistry courses here at UT Dallas. So basically we have different components that fall all under the umbrella of this general program called PCR, Peer-Led Chemistry Reality Amplifying Knowledge. So it's important, I think, to discussing each component in detail for each of the tasks and the plans that you are having in your educational component. And I think what is also very, very important, because this is noticed by the reviewers, is to showcase your past experience in developing educational components to justify the feasibility and the engagement. Another important aspect, develop assessment tools and metrics to evaluate the success and potential learning outcomes from each component. These can be surveys, student evaluations. Obviously, depending on what you are proposing, this can be very different, but it's important to have assessment and metric tools to evaluate the success. And also important is to highlight how integrated a multifaceted educational and outreach program can benefit students' education and the broader community awareness. And you can do that in different ways, but it's important that you highlight these aspects. So just to give you a brief overview, just because we are approaching the end, I want to actually discuss briefly what we came up with. As I mentioned before, we wanted to develop this series of videos for student virtual outreach called Chemistry Reality. And we basically got involved the UTD Geosciences studios that are specialized in generating educational videos, in which basically we will generate this video series in our laboratory that will then share to the broader community and audience to get them a feeling on how research is conducted in a bioorganic chemistry lab. Then I had a component for developing undergraduate research experiences in bioorganic chemistry at UT Dallas. This involved participation in programs that are already present and that I have been involved with UTD, like the UTD Mexico Summer Research Scholar Program. And then in particular in programs that promote underrepresented minority research. And here, obviously, many of us develop undergraduate research experiences, but what you want to provide here is actually you want to provide actual data on what has been your engagement, what has been the number of students that you have trained in your lab that are coming from underrepresented minorities. So give and showcase facts that can really support that you are very well suited to develop these research experiences. And this is also true without high school student education and research experiences through a series of programs that I have included in the proposal. And then the last component that I had was to develop a new set of bioorganic chemistry courses that have a different peer-led component, such a way that you show that that particular course is actually unique and novel. And in particular, you want to showcase and say, yeah, well, if I am developing a course that is already in the duty of a faculty at a university, I think it's important that you show that you want to cover either new areas that are not covered and available in your institution, or cover topics that the main curriculum in your institution is not currently covering, so that you can have a new component and the novel component that would be unique for based on your expertise and your proposed topics. Again, as I said, it's important to present specific and not general assessment tools. Really present numbers, present data, present how you will evaluate with specific assessment surveys. So it's the more specific you are, the better it is. Then obviously there are the remaining parts related to management plan. So it's important that you define and justify the PI effort and role in the proposed research in details. It's important that you define and justify the team that will be involved, like graduate students, postdoc, and collaborators, and what is their role. And it's also very important that you define a detailed timeline for each specific aim of the research and educational component. And this can be just simply a table or a diagram, but the reviewers should know exactly when you will be doing what and when to expect the outcome evaluated in the 5 year that you will be supported by the career grant. Budget is also important, should be appropriate and justified in detail. As I mentioned before, considering differences in funding levels in different directorates. Do not over budget the proposal because that is never good in the eye of a program officer. And I think a good idea is to look into already funded career proposal for funding levels. You can go online and go on the product search engine of the NSF and see what are the funding levels of proposal that are in the area of your expertise. I think it's important to consider the requesting specific funds for the educational plan, because this can actually show the commitment and effort towards the educational component of your proposal. And again, for questions, you can always contact the program officers. They are very helpful when you are asking questions. Last but not least, letters of collaborations they are extremely important in the eyes of the reviewers and the program officers. Include as many as possible based on the research and educational plans. And one aspect is that since the letters for the NSF careers have a generic format as listed here and do not really describe anything related to the specific contribution of the collaborator components, it's important that you actually introduce those descriptions in the actual proposal itself and not in the letter of collaboration that will be attached to the proposal. Other important aspect is the letter of support from your department chair. I think it's important that you proactively work closely with your chair to write a strong and compelling letter. It should be detailed and not generic, and should especially highlight past achievement and showcase unique contribution, such a way that you are on the spotlight as an emerging leader in the field, I think. Finalizing your proposal. Throughout the process, very important to discuss the proposal with colleagues and friends. I have had great support and a lot of discussion with many colleagues. I have had many discussions, for example, with Professor Valerio Jungo that presented last time at the NSF Career Spotlight. It's important as well that you have people that are not expert in your field that can give a different eye to the content of your proposal. Have the proposal ready in advance to have enough time to edit it and improve it, and you can consider having editing and proofreading by professional, like from the Office of Research or colleagues. After submission, you have to be patient. It will take several months before you know the outcome. Be ready for the criticism from reviewer. They are typically not personal, and they are usually very helpful. No one likes to get critiques, but typically they are helpful, and in the case your first submission is not successful, you can really learn a lot from the comments and try to address those weaknesses that have been identified. If it's not funded at the first time, you're not the first. We all submit grants that are not funded at the first time. We will not be the last. Just have a positive attitude so that you can then improve and submit your next proposal. When you will receive the notification that your proposal is being recommended for funding, it will be a fantastic moment, and I can assure you that it's worth all the effort in spending time in developing this. Obviously, you want to provide evidence that you have contributed to the field. You can introduce some of your work and references in the proposal itself. What I think it's important is that you acknowledge your research group, and I have done it in my proposal because they are the one that basically allow to have a basis for you to develop a compelling research plan and as well educational plan. And with that, I think I probably cover most of what I wanted to tell today, so I will be happy to answer any question.
Thank you, Dr. Meloni. That was very informative. We do have a few questions in the queue, two that you had already answered in your discussion. But what one audience member wants to know is, what steps did you personally take to develop your NSF career proposal outside of when to submit and what should be the core research education topics of the proposal? Did it all start with an idea? And when that idea came to fruition, what were your top 3 to 5 action items?
Yeah, so I think so. The ideas actually that I had as a starting point were, first of all, for the educational component, I wanted to really, as a focus, ensure that we could, in the proposal, have the broader community learn about a topic that is typically unknown, that is bioorganic chemistry. You know, this is something that is typically not covered in curriculum if you are taking a chemistry degree or a biochemistry degree. Typically students, they would not be even aware of what a research in bioorganic chemistry would mean, so how they could enter a lab and what are the topics that are covered. So that was the educational component. And the other components in research was really an idea that I had developed in the first 3 years as assistant professor, because we basically develop new tools and methodology that allow to study these particular transporter proteins. Now that we have these tools, we can really target this very large class of protein that can basically provide information on basic chemical principle on how in general these transporters work. And this particular aspect would be only addressed if we had the methodology to do so. So before being able to propose to do this research, it was very important to actually have the development part of the methodology to do that, to have a proposal that was solid. Otherwise, it would have been very risky and say, I want to do this particular research to address this particular point, but the methodology is not available, right?
Right. Very good, and thank you for that thorough answer. Who did you work with in an effort to develop a partnership with undergraduate institute and high school students to support your proposed broader impact activities?
Yeah, so this is essentially something that we are starting to develop now. So I think for me was really the key point is to get engagement, in particular from an undergraduate team that in this particular case is the UTD Geosciences Studios, that is a group of students that is deeply involved in developing videos for outreach. In their case, they are specialized in geosciences, but you know they are basically more focused on the educational aspect of those videos. And once that partnership basically was developed, then obviously we have now the tool to contact local institutions in Dallas-Fort Worth area. Like, for example, we proposed to contact both Dallas ISD high schools and as well primary undergraduate institution in the area like Austin College. So the idea there is that once we have this set of videos and we have this connection, that by the way, these connections are something that you will develop once you have your proposal funded. This will then basically allow to have a series of institutions that would basically promote the diffusion of the videos that you have generated. That was the idea behind.
Thank you very much. And I can see exactly how that would all play out, and I think it will be useful. Another question, how will you personally assess the outcome of your broader impact activity, the video tutorials?
So I think that obviously this will be distributed initially to schools, and we can actually evaluate the success by having an evaluation within each institution and the contact points that we are having there to see what are the responses from the students. But what we propose, and actually the idea behind, was actually really to develop a metrics to see if we would use this series of video, not only for outreach to school, but we make them available on the web. And we promote them on the web, for example, on our website for our lab and through other outreach venues. What is the response? How many people will be actually looking at the videos? How many are recurring attendees to the videos, such a way that, you know, it means that they attend the first time and then they find it interesting and they continue to attend the series. And if those number, and we had actually metrics in the proposal itself, if those number are good, we can actually then propose to enlarge the outreach outside the DFW area and make it more broad and general.
Very good. Well, thank you for sharing your time and wisdom with the attendees today, Dr. Meloni. We have many other programs on the horizon, and if you're interested in attending any of those, please check out our website. The Office of Research and Innovation webpage is research.utdallas.edu. Thank you and have a nice afternoon.